All right, welcome everyone to this week's Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And this week's webinar topic is Enterprise Application Software Development. Now, this is just going to be a presentation. We're not, going to be playing around with Xojo, really, unless some questions have something that requires me to go in to show people. So essentially, I'm going to go through the presentation and take questions as needed. We should have a fair amount of time at the end or throughout for questions, so feel free to ask anything that pops into your head. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So what is enterprise application software? Well, essentially, this is software that's used by medium and large businesses to solve problems. And it's typically highly specialized. It's the reason why this stuff tends to exist is because these type of large businesses have their way of doing specific things, and they're not happy just buying an off-the-shelf product. They want, they have lots of money, and they generally want to spend it on software that will work exactly the way they want it to work. This software is often large and complex. These generally are fairly good-sized companies. They might have business processes that have been in place for quite a while. Those themselves can become complex, and the software to manage them can also become complex. Another reason it can become complex is because these larger companies are paying to have software built specifically for them, and often they'll get exactly what they want, which results in large and complex things. This type of software is often created by multi-person teams. Generally speaking, you're going to have a team of more than one person creating enterprise software. It's not always the case, but it's pretty common. So what are some examples of enterprise software? Well, probably the number one thing you see is accounting software. Businesses need to keep track of money, and accounting software is ways to do it. And for some reason, people like to have their own accounting software created. So this is a common type of thing you would see. Business intelligence. This is type of software that can monitor the business in general to provide feedback on how it's going. Business process management to just track the flow of various processes that the business has to do to get their work done, their job done, or whatever it is they actually do. And a lot of these are very generic terms because they encompass a lot of things, but again, the details of what they do are very specific to the actual business. Content management systems are also something you might commonly see, and that's for managing the information within the business, documents or whatever it is that the particular business has to track. If it's an insurance company, they probably have lots of forms and things like that they're going to need to manage. So they'll need software systems for that. Customer relationship management software, CRM. There are a fair amount of products that are available that can do CRM, but I still see larger businesses still want to be able to do things their own way. Sometimes they might take an existing product and modify it. Sometimes they might build something from scratch. But this allows the business to, be able to connect with their customers, track everything their customers do, what they might purchase or buy or anything related to that. And a Salesforce system is another type of enterprise software. Again, there are very large companies that make Salesforce systems. I think there actually is a company called Salesforce, if memory serves. But these are to help your sales department sell things. And it can be anything. Larger companies often will have a sales department that sells things. And systems like this can track leads, customers that have talked to, where they are in the pipeline. Sometimes, selling things can take a very long time, months or years, and they need to track all this stuff. And a common underlying thread of all of these things is that they generally rely pretty heavily on databases. So you can keep that in mind as you think about all these things, but there's almost always going to be a database of some sort behind the scenes that's managing all this information. Speaking of which, what are some of the common components of enterprise software? Well, as I mentioned, the database. Pretty key. I mean, the underlying factor in all these things is something about the business is being managed in some way, and this is information or data, and the primary place to put that sort of stuff is in a database. It makes it easy to retrieve, search, index, look up stuff, all the typical things that a database is great for. There's going to need to be a user interface of some kind, and you can have desktop applications for use by whoever happens to be using the software. You can also have a web interface, and the differences vary depending on what it is you're trying to build. All of the particular things that I listed at the beginning, I've seen created in both desktop and web versions. Desktop versions typically have the advantage of being having a more rich user interface. But they can be more challenging to deploy if you have lots of people around your company that you need to get the application installed on. Whereas web applications, people can just go to a central server that you've set up to use the application, and deployment becomes a lot simpler. But your user interface also, to some extent, also has to become a bit simpler. And nowadays, mobile is often a companion to one of these two things so that people can access the information when they're out and about. Particularly helpful for like sales departments to be able to bring up stuff. Forcing them to dig out a laptop, run a desktop app, ensure they actually have Wi-Fi on their laptop. That can be quite a bit of overhead. Whereas if you have a nice mobile app that can just use the cellular network to pull up information, very handy, quick and easy. People like that. And there's often some sort of API. This is application programming interface. And this is a way to communicate with perhaps other systems that already exist within the company. So you may be building an enterprise application, but there's already stuff that existed somewhere in the company you need to talk to, maybe extract data from it or put data into it, whatever it could be. And so these are another type of common component that you can see. Good ways to build these sort of things are using something like the REST protocol, which is a simple HTTP transfer mechanism, and the SOAP protocol, which is also HTTP based, and is used by some older systems. I'd say this was more popular back probably around like 10 years ago or so. So I choose Xojo to create enterprise applications. But here are some benefits of choosing Xojo. By far, the first one would be speed of development. Creating applications, as anyone who's used Xojo for any amount of time can tell you, is very, very quick. I like to jokingly tell people when they're comparing tools that you'll often be able to download and install and create your first app with Xojo before something like Visual Studio finishes downloading, let alone installing. So you can quickly create software using Xojo, and that can be good for a variety of reasons. I mean, it's always good to not spend, an enormous amount of time building software that, people in the business need to be able to use. But it also has the great benefit of being able to turn things around quickly, show prototypes, mock-ups, that sort of thing. Xojo also allows for multiple platforms to be easily created. Whoops. One too many clicking here. Hang on, I need to move my Q&A window, so pardon me while that. All right, there we go. So Xojo allows you to create apps that run on multiple platforms very, very easily. We'll obviously talk about this a little bit more, but this is one of the major strengths of Xojo. And another thing is that Xojo is actively developed and updated, so you can be certain that things will continue to be fixed, enhanced, all that sort of stuff that happens with software. So let's talk about rapid development. Well, Xojo is lightweight and agile. Agile is one of those terms, those buzzwords you hear thrown around all the time these days. But it's pretty important. Creating software, and some places still might do it this way, but many, many years ago, the software was created using what was called a waterfall technique, where someone would sit down and write specifications for the software, this big giant document that described how everything worked. And then that would be handed off to people who would actually build the software over some very long period of time. And then when they were done, they would hand it off to a group of people that would essentially test it out, try to use it. And over time, pretty much most people came to realize that probably wasn't the most efficient way to make software. And now there's something called Agile, which is a little more iterative. Small pieces are built over time. So you do things in short chunks of time periods, turn around your work, show it to people, and you iterate so that your software adapts to what people really want and what they need it to do. And a tool like Xojo works really well with that because it is just so darn fast and flexible. It's easy to make changes. It's easy to build them. It's easy to do all that. So it works well if you happen to use that type of development process. Xojo itself has a very easy to learn language. Its programming language is type safe, so you can't accidentally be sticking strings into your integers and causing runtime errors in your important accounting software. All this stuff is tracked at compilation time. It's also fully object-oriented, so you can design your software using real-world concepts and make things a little more efficient and reusable. And of course, you can develop, test, and build right from the single Xojo IDE. Everything's right there. And a really cool thing that tends to be a benefit for a lot of people these days with more and more platforms being chosen is you can actually develop using any platform. So Xojo can, of course, create apps for just about any platform, but you can also develop using OS X and create Windows apps. You can develop on Windows and create OS X apps. You can develop on Linux and create Windows apps. It doesn't matter. So if you have a development staff that's mixed and match for whatever reasons, they can all use Xojo on whatever platform they're most comfortable with and still be able to work on the team. So multi-platform. Well, first, Xojo can create desktop apps. It's been able to do this for many, many years. And it can create desktop apps for Microsoft Windows, OS X, and Linux. And I'll probably also mention in a later slide, but Xojo can target Microsoft Windows XP and newer, which includes right through Windows 8.1. And we've done some preliminary testing on the tech preview of Windows 10. So everything seems to continue to work just fine there. OS X support is for OS 10.7, which is Lion and newer, right through the current version of OS 10.10, which is Yosemite. And Linux, we support a wide variety of Linux distributions. They're all noted on our webpage, but ones like Ubuntu and Mint and Red Hat and all that stuff. Xojo also can create web applications. And Xojo web applications have easy standalone deployment. You can use a Windows service. So you can essentially build a web app, compile it, and deploy it as a Windows service right within your organization, and boom, you're done. You don't need a special web server set up that has to have IIS properly configured and souped up for what its system requirements are. So it makes it very easy to deploy applications. Now, this is great for more of internal type stuff, but it can also be used for smaller apps that need to service APIs or other types of smaller requests. You can do the same thing on Linux using its own daemon mechanism, and OS X has an equivalent mechanism as well. And you can also do what's called CGI deployment of web applications. And this allows the web app to interface with an actual web server, such as Apache. People have been able to get it to work with pretty much all the common ones. Apache is the one that is by far most commonly used. I've seen setups with IIS and also Nginx, I believe. But you can interface all those through CGI to communicate with Xojo web applications. And in addition, we offer cloud hosting of Xojo web apps, so you don't even have to worry about it at all. You can just deploy to our cloud and let people access software from there and not have to worry about managing hardware or security or any of that stuff that can become quite a time sink. Xojo can also target mobile apps in a couple ways. You can do that using a web app. Obviously, you can have a mobile web app that essentially is a web app that will display different user interface when it detects that it is running on a mobile device. And that's all well and good. And we also have iOS ability to create iOS apps. It's currently in beta testing. And we have a lot of people looking at that right now, and that should be available really soon. We're really excited about this. And a little teaser, there's a little app that was made using the Xojo iOS beta. You can see, it has all the usual controls and whatnot. So it should be a great companion to this sort of thing to allow you to have essentially a suite of applications that your organization requires. And I did already mention the mobile web apps. Now, Xojo's been around since 1998. Its name has changed a few times over the years. It originally started as a product called Real Basic, became Real Studio, and now is called Xojo. But it has been around since 1998 and has been actively developed throughout that entire time. Our current process is that we typically do quarterly releases. So that's, on average about 4 a year, give or take, depending on the year and what we are undertaking. And I have mentioned the OS support, and these tend to evolve over time. But currently, the specific support is OS X Cocoa 10.7 through 10.10, Windows XP through Windows 8.1, and as I mentioned, a variety of Linux distributions that are all outlined on our system requirements page. And I think I just read an article recently that said that a combination of Windows 8 and 8.1 has finally jumped ahead, I believe, to be the majority version of Windows that's being used out there, and Windows XP continues to dwindle down. So that should be good news for people that are concerned about Windows XP or particularly some of the security issues it might have. And of course, iOS, as I just mentioned before, is in beta. Over time, we've added new platforms. I mean, since 1998, we didn't start in 1998 with the first version of Xojo supporting all kinds of platforms. First, it was Macintosh. Actually, I believe it was the OS 9 version back in 1998, long time ago. And then the OS X version, the OS X ability to create apps for OS X was added. And then Windows was added, then Linux, then the ability to do web applications. Coming soon is the ability to do iOS. And then who can predict the future? But we like to have lots of options for people. All right. Well, Xojo can work with any existing stuff you might have in place. So it fits the architecture of any apps that you've already have in your enterprise. So for example, Xojo can work with any source control system. It can connect to just about any database. It can probably consume just about any API. So if you have existing apps that or processes in place, Xojo is probably going to be able to fit into what you have without much trouble. Let's talk a bit about source control. As I mentioned, Xojo works with any source control system. Some common ones are Git, Subversion, Mercurial, Microsoft Team Foundation Server. That may have a new name now, actually. Vault, and other ones that have escaped me at the moment. And we've actually done, here in the Xojo weekly webinars, we've done webinars on using Git and Subversion. I did an overview of Git and Subversion earlier this year, and then we had special guest Justin Elliott come on in the last couple months and give more in-depth coverage of using Git with Xojo. And both those source control tools just work fabulously with Xojo. Xojo just saves all your code as text, and anything that's text can work great with a source control system. Databases is another topic that comes up often in webinars. So for specific informations about databases, you can dive into other webinars we've done. In particular, at this point, we've covered SQLite a few times, MySQL, and Postgres, I believe. But Xojo supports all kinds of databases. There's support for Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle database, PostgreSQL, as I mentioned, MySQL and Mariah database. Pretty much they're kind of the same with different licensing. And those are some of the specific ones that Xojo has built-in support for. It also, of course, supports SQLite. But for enterprise software, you generally tend to use an actual database server rather than a smaller single-user embedded database. Although SQLite certainly has its uses for other things in enterprise software for local caching and stuff like that. In addition, Xojo has full support for ODBC, so it can use that to connect to whatever else is remaining that you may have that you can find an ODBC driver for. I've used ODBC to connect to IBM databases, and you can also use ODBC to connect to other open source databases such as Firebird. And we actually recently did an ODBC webinar as well that described how to use it for connecting to some other things. All right, let's talk a little bit about web services. Well, with Xojo, you can easily implement REST services. And as I mentioned, these are the, what does that stand for? Representative state transfer, I believe. I don't actually know if it actually stands for anything anymore. That might be what it initially stood for. But it's essentially an HTTP mechanism for communicating with web servers. And you pretty much just define your own mechanism for this. But with Xojo web apps, you can easily create a Xojo web app and put in your code in a specific place to process any requests that come in, do what needs to be done, and send requests back. So very easy to do that. And this works great in conjunction with the standalone deployment that I mentioned, but also works with the CGI as well. Xojo can, of course, consume REST and SOAP services from other systems. So if you already have pre-existing services in place built using some other technology, .NET or Java or whatnot, Xojo can talk to them and get the information back. All right, so what are some of the more powerful capabilities of Xojo? Well, when you need power, you need to have a framework, you need to be able to integrate, you need to be extensible. And last thing we'll talk about is compiled, how Xojo's apps are actually compiled. So frameworks. Well, the Xojo framework is fully object-oriented. So it'll be very familiar to other frameworks you may have worked with in the past. So not much to worry about there. It's great having a fully object-oriented framework. Makes it a little easier to pick up and learn and understand. The Xojo framework is focused. This is our way of saying that it's not this gigantic thing that will take you years and years to master. Something like the .NET framework, very, very thorough, covers a lot of things, but it's, not everyone's going to be able to understand the entire framework just because it is so darn big. Xojo has advanced features that can be used to create your own frameworks, which is something just about any enterprise app I've ever worked on has had. Generally, internal frameworks are created that are, again, specific to the needs of what the application needs to do. So Xojo has introspection, may have also been called reflection if you've used other tools, and it allows you to query actual classes in your app at runtime. It can be very handy for doing things like saving the contents of a class, restoring them from a disk or a database, that sort of thing. And it can be a great way to make code that's very, very reusable depending on the application. And another slick feature that Xojo has is something called Xojo Script, which essentially allows Xojo to compile code itself in a running app. And this app can be used, this code can be used to interact with the app that's running. So you can almost think of it as Xojo has its own compiler embedded within itself, which is pretty slick. So it allows you to do things like create something for your power users. You can give them an interface with some documented methods that they can access, and they could write their own little methods that would interact with your app. And properly implemented, this can allow you to have an app that is very extensible and something and is really geared towards your power users without having to make it so complex that your regular users kind of freak out and get scared by it. And again, we've done specific webinars on introspection and Xojo Script that can give you specifics on how to use those things in your applications. And a couple other features that Xojo has that are on the more advanced side would be delegates. So you can have different methods be used as a delegate for another method, which can be very handy for, again, low-level framework design and stuff like that. And there's also built-in operator overloading, which allows you to define the general operators in the programming language, addition, comparison, that sort of thing. And what happens when those are used on classes that are part of your application. And again, a lot of this stuff is often used for initial framework design of more complicated applications. Simple apps often don't need to touch any of these specific features, but when you're building larger scale applications, these things all come in very, very handy. All right, let's talk a bit about integrations. Xojo has very good access to OS APIs. I mean, in its own framework, it provides access to many of the most commonly used things. But there could be specific OS APIs that you want access to, and you can get them through Xojo. It has a declare command that allows you to essentially interface directly with any part of the Win32 library on Windows, the Cocoa library on OS X. And for people that need to do that, there's actually even a couple open source projects that have scooped up a bunch of this stuff for you into one place so you can easily access it. So for OS X and Cocoa support, you can grab the macOS lib project, which is on GitHub. And it's filled with all kinds of fun stuff that is in Cocoa that you can use in your OS X apps. And there's a, not directly related, but kind of a companion product, the Windows Functionality Suite, also open source, also on GitHub, that provides Windows type functionality. We don't yet have an open source product for people that have need to access Linux specific stuff. But we're hoping our folks that are Linux gurus are going to be focusing on that at some point. All right, on the web side, you can integrate and use JavaScript components in the user interface for all your web apps. Again, Xojo includes a fair amount of components that you can use in your web apps, but if there's other existing JavaScript components or ones you want to create yourself, you can do that and then hook them up directly into Xojo and then use them in your Xojo web apps. So you're not boxed in by what Xojo just provides by default. You can expand it and to do more. Speaking of which, is extensibility, probably what I should have written there. So the first part is a robust, active, and helpful community has to be mentioned because this is one of the best places to go when you have questions about something or want to talk about how to do something and bounce ideas off other people. Now, if you're in an enterprise, you probably have a fair amount of people around you that you can do that with, but sometimes it's also great to hit up the forum for other people that might be more experienced with Xojo to give you some advice down that path. There also are quite a few third-party products and vendors that create things that work with Xojo. There's lots of libraries available and plugins. And there's also open source projects. Again, quite a bit of these. We list these and the third-party products and the vendors and the open source projects are all listed on our documentation wiki. After this, we'll take a quick look at that and see what some of the links are and how you can find that stuff. But yeah, there's a long list of things there. It's updated all the time as new stuff becomes available. And it can be a great place to find things that might help speed up your development even more. You know, if someone already built something and made it available, it might make sense to just either buy that or use that rather than attempting to recreate the wheel, so to speak. Now, unlike some tools, Xojo apps are all compiled. They're compiled as a native app for each operating system. And there's no runtime. There's a framework that's used, of course, but there's no runtime. Your apps are compiled right down to native code. So this means when you write your application and you build it for Windows, you get a native Windows application. You build it for OS X, you get a native OS X app. On Linux, native Linux app. You build for iOS, you get a native iOS app. And when you build for web, you actually also get a compiled app that runs on the server. And it communicates with the web browser using a JavaScript framework that runs in the web browser. And some web browsers might do a little bit of optimization and might even be compiling that. But that part is not technically directly compiled. But the web app itself and all the Xojo code that you write is actually compiled code that runs on the web server. And this can provide some speed and security over more scripting type languages that people can easily read the source code for and perhaps even hack into. So for desktop apps on Windows, the Win32 library is what is used. So all Xojo apps are Win32 apps. On OS X, all Xojo apps are Cocoa apps right now. There is still legacy support for Carbon included, but at this point, pretty much all apps that people are creating are Cocoa. On Linux, the GTK user interface library is used. As I mentioned on web, it's compiled code with JavaScript. And iOS, of course, uses the Cocoa Touch framework. All right, let's see here. I got a couple questions that have popped up on my list, so let me just take a quick look at those. I just got a comment here from Justin to remind everyone that Xojo has excellent JSON support. And I probably should have mentioned that a couple slides ago on perhaps the communication and the API stuff. But yes, Xojo has built-in classes for reading and creating and writing JSON. So it allows it to easily parse information that it gets from web services or whatever else happens to be using that. Also, of course, has complete XML support for data, for XML data that you may need to work with. And Dwayne is asking, can an app be decompiled in order to get access to the source code? Well, no, Xojo apps cannot be decompiled to get access to source code unless, I suppose, like any app, you decompile it down to its initial assembly and then attempt to read that. But it's not like tools that have a runtime where I think .NET had this issue, maybe even Java, where you can kind of decompile the top level code down to another layer that is pretty easy to digest and understand. So Xojo is not like that. It's a direct compiler. It's compiling it down to actual code, machine code that isn't something that's really decompiled back to its original source. All right, so let's talk a bit about documentation and training for Xojo. Well, Xojo, of course, includes a user guide and language reference to help get you quickly jump started. The user guide is divided into 4 books, kind of an intro book at the beginning that covers the IDE itself, the language, and some object-oriented concepts for people that are new to that. And then there are the other books cover the user interface and all the various components that are available, all the frameworks. And then the last book covers development topics such as deployment, source control, and cross-platform specific things. Xojo also includes over 250 example projects. So if you're, run into something that you're wondering how to do, well, certainly opening up the Xojo examples is probably a great place to start to see if there's something there that might help you out. We've beefed up the examples quite a bit over the years, and there are certainly a lot in there. So by all means, do check them out. And as you know, if you're here, we do weekly webinars on topics that vary greatly, often steered by customer feedback. So always submit your ideas for webinar sessions. At this point, we have over 60 that are available on our YouTube channel online. In addition, you can purchase an enterprise license of Xojo, which includes some training, typically by me. So if you're looking to kind of start quickly and hit the ground running, this might be an option for you. And every year we do an Xojo Developer Conference. Our conference this year was in the spring, and it was in Las Vegas. Our conference next year, our next conference, is in Austin, Texas. And Austin is a great, fun place to be, and it's pretty central for most people that are in the United States, and not too bad to get to from Europe. So you should certainly consider that if you want to be able to talk to a bunch of other people that use Xojo professionally. You can make some good networking contacts. You can get some great advice. There's lots of sessions, of course. And last year it did sell out. So we are encouraging people to make sure they register early if they are thinking about coming. We still have our early bird discount running through November, and that saves you about $250 off the registration fee. Right now, we're in the process of reviewing the many session topics that were submitted for presentation at the conference, and we should have that schedule announced soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. And of course, there's also third-party training available, a company called Bikini Software, has hours and hours of training videos on their website that you can subscribe to watch. So that's a great, great resource as well. All right, looking here, I see there's one other question. Arthur is asking, what about protecting software keys? And yeah, protecting software keys. Well, that's just a general programming type of problem. Xojo does include some cryptography stuff for using RSA encryption for storing that sort of stuff. You can also use encrypted SQLite databases. So there are some ways that you can kind of hide information that you don't want people to easily access. And that all that stuff could be used in conjunction with protecting software keys. But Xojo itself doesn't have any specific things in its framework for dealing with that. That's sort of the thing that you would probably want to create yourself anyway, because that does make it more difficult for people to figure out if you're the only person that is using it. All right, I want to hit up a few features of the Xojo IDE itself that can help with projects. And one thing is called project templates. And this allows you to create essentially starter projects that will show up in the little the list when Xojo is launched. And you can just click those and boom, start your project and have all this stuff pre-populated for you. So if you have a common set of low-level frameworks that your company has created that you tend to use very often, you can build all those, and then any new project you start can just have those pulled in automatically by default. That can be very handy. Xojo also has IDE scripting, and this allows you to write little scripts using the Xojo script language and companion methods that allow you to control the IDE to a certain extent. You can open windows, change things. So it allows for some level of automation of some tasks. And it's related to the other feature called build automation that allows you to, again, write scripts that can control the build process. So you can kick off specific builds, move files around, all that sort of stuff. You can actually have during the build process scripts run to copy or move files or set up things, so really whatever you need to do. Xojo also has code sharing. So you can, if you have common code that you want to share across multiple projects, you can actually export that in a special file format that can then be shared between the projects. You still want to make sure this stuff's all properly managed using your source control system, of course. And sharing things at the source code level does have some amount of risk across multiple projects because you wouldn't want someone to make a change to some shared code for their project and have that change end up breaking your project, which might be a different project. So that's more of an internal process thing, but Xojo does have that ability if that's the type of development process that you work with. The Xojo code editor has autocomplete and syntax help. And it also has a container control that can be used on desktop and web apps, which is absolutely fabulous for creating reusable user interface components. So if it turns out you have a specific UI control that consists of a bunch of other controls and functionality, you can put this into a container and then use it throughout your application on different windows or web pages or whatnot. An incredible time saver and a great way to keep your code organized better. All right. And that's the end here. I got a couple comments that have popped up here. In reference to Arthur's comment, Craig has noted that this month's magazine, XDev magazine, has an article covering the topic of protecting your software. And Craig also notes that it was written by a Harold Halblieb. This is why I only speak people's first names when I note questions, so I don't tend to absolutely destroy their last names. And even sometimes I get stumped on first names. And I should have mentioned the magazine on my list of training and whatnot, but that page was already pretty full of stuff. There is a Xojo magazine, publishes every other month. It's been published now for something like 12 years. And it's a great resource for Xojo tips and techniques and topics. And as you can see here, it even had an article on protecting your software. So it's certainly a great resource and worth checking out. All right, so you have my email address here. I'm always happy to answer questions from customers or non-customers who have just general questions about Xojo. So always feel free to email me. And let's take a look here in Safari at a couple of the pages that I was talking about earlier. All right, so our language reference is all online. There's also a local version available embedded within Xojo. And from the language reference, you can pretty much connect to everything documentation related. You can access the guides, which are available in PDF and iBooks formats. The PDFs are included with Xojo, but if you want the iBooks formats, you got to download them separately. You can grab them from here. You can also get them from the iBooks. Actually, I forget what Apple officially calls that, but it's the iBook store. You can just search for Xojo on there and grab the books as well. They're all free, of course. And so there's guides there. You can always see the video archive of all the webinars on the video page. And we have all the webinars listed here, topic and date, and any notes, example projects, or slides that you can download with them. And as you can see, these are just the ones from 2014. And then we did quite a few as well in 2013. Our community portal has some links to the third-party products page, which has a wide variety of products available for Xojo that are categorized here. And you can just, scroll through the list, see what you want, click the links, do all that sort of stuff. And certainly if you happen to stumble across something that you found for Xojo that's not in the list, by all means, let me know so I can get it added. We want to keep this as complete as possible. And then related to this is the community resources page, which has bloggers that use Xojo, interesting topics you can read about, links to other places you can get information, and an ever-growing list of open source projects created using Xojo. Some pretty cool stuff in here, so this is definitely worth checking out. Let's see how, last question on here says, Rodrigo has asked, when will Xojo iOS be available? Well, it'll be available when it's out of beta. That's about all I can say. But we're working really, really hard on it and very eager to get it into everyone's hands. So there you go. I am annoyed by the iStat reminding me I have an update. But other than that, I don't think I had anything else to show people today in this particular webinar. So if there are no further questions, we'll probably wrap up. Let me just check the question board here. All right, no, that looks like all the questions. So I think we're done for this week. So I want to thank everyone for attending. We do these every week. Next week is actually a podcast, so it won't be an actual presentation. It'll just be some chatting. I haven't announced who the special guest is yet, but I will do that soon. And I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.